Hi, everyone, and welcome to a special presentation in honor of International Women's Day here on Camões TV. My name is Angie Camara, and thank you for tuning in live on Bell 5659, Rogers Cable 672, and Rogers Ignite 880 Plus. You're watching live across all of Camões TV's social media channels. If you have any questions, you can connect with us there. International Women's Day shines a spotlight on activity, encouraging and uplifting women to pursue goals without bias or barriers. While it goes without saying that society must work every single day to recognize and provide women with opportunities, this becomes a much louder conversation during this time of the year. As we celebrate women's achievements, we have to recognize that the pandemic has had disproportionate impact on women, threatening decades of gender equity and progress. This conversation is a call to action. There is something so incredibly powerful about the collective brain power of women who share their journey so that others can learn from them. I am thrilled to introduce a group of brilliant Luso leaders who are forging an inclusive world in their professional and personal lives. Joanna Vicente is the Executive Director and Co-Head of the Toronto International Film Festival and a very prominent figure in the New York film industry. In the Big Apple, she served as the Executive Director of the Independent Filmmaker Project, and under her leadership, the organization launched Made in New York Media Center, a co-working space incubator exhibition venue at the intersection of storytelling, media, and technology. Hola, Joanna. Josie Scioli is a Deputy City Manager of Corporate Services at the City of Toronto. In fact, she's one of 4 women who make up the City Manager's senior leadership team, and she provides strategic leadership to the city's 311 technology services and corporate real estate divisions, just to name a few. Prior to the city, Josie spent 2 decades at Bell Canada and earned an extensive depth and breadth of experience within her root principles of customer service excellence, financial accountability, and talent management. Hola, Josie. Desiree Lopes is an engineer by trade and over a decade of experience in international development. Currently, Desiree is the Director of Programs at the Future Skills Center, an organization focused on innovation and applied research. Prior to joining the Future Skills Center, Desiree was the Associate Director of a Global Capacity Building Initiative at Yale University, where she also completed her MBA. Hi, Desiree. Thank you, ladies, for joining me. I'm thrilled to have you here. It's such a pleasure. So we've learned a little bit about you, but we want to learn even more. Joanna, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, please? Where are you from? Where were you born? And how did you end up running one of the largest and most prestigious film festivals in the world?
So I was born in Macau, but I grew up in Lisbon and traveling back and forth to Macau. And then I met my husband, who's American, and we moved to New York over 25 years ago. I was always passionate about film since I was a kid. Just always, film was the thing that I loved. Was where I escaped when things were tough around me, and then. When I came to New York, I first started a little bit working in politics and doing radio, and then started working in film. I had some experience in Portugal, working with a well-known Portuguese producer, Paulo Branco, who has films now at TIFF, and then in New York is really where I launched my career as a producer. We started doing short films and then feature-length films, and was always an entrepreneur. So we had a production company. We then created the first digital production company in the US We sold it to Mark Cuban. And then after a while of doing my own thing and producing a lot of films and supporting filmmakers and having films in festivals like Toronto and others, I was on the board of a nonprofit called Independent Filmmaker Project, and they asked me to step in and look at the viability of the organization. Was during the financial crisis, so we were in trouble at the IFP. So I stepped in, and then I loved what I was doing, and in a way, it was different than producing because you're not just working in one project, but you're helping a lot of filmmakers and a lot of filmmakers bringing stories to and connecting them to audiences. So it was something that I was always very passionate about. And the same with technology and how technology can help us tell better stories and have access to audiences. So anyway, TIFF, it seemed like it combined all of the things that I love. I love the festival. I had many films in Toronto. And so it was really a dream come true. And I'm thrilled to be here.
Wonderful. And what do you think of Toronto the Good as a city?
I love Toronto. So I always enjoyed coming to the city, and it's been really nice. I mean, now the last year, not so much, but it's been great to meet new people, to get to know a different city. Also fell in love with some of the areas around Toronto. So it's been a great experience.
Wonderful. Well, that's a great segue to Josie, who is one of the leaders at the City of Toronto. And most of you can't tell by Josie's last name, but Señora Scioli actually hails from the Azores. And like many, her parents came to Canada for more opportunity and a better life. So Josie, did your parents deliver? Did Canada deliver? Do you think that you do have a better life here than you would at home? And the most important question, who is Josie Scioli?
Well, that could take us some hours to go through that one, but absolutely, I have a great life, and you make it your own, and we're very lucky. And I would say you make your life what it is, right? So yes, Canada's been a great country for us, in Toronto in particular. When I came here and I was 9 months old, I was just a baby. My parents came with 2 suitcases, and myself and my sister was 2.5 years, and they came for a better life. That's what they came for. And my dad and mom, my dad was a longshoreman, my mom was a cleaner, and they worked really hard, and they believed that Canada, it was a land of opportunity based on where they came, and they were in their mid-20s at the time. But I also believe that they honored their past to move forward with what they did in Canada. As an individual, my generation in particular, and I might be a little bit older than the rest, education and economic opportunity was not always there. It was more challenging for women in particular too at times. And coming from the environment that I came from and the culture that I came from, it was not always supported. But I had parents that were extremely supportive. If anything, they pushed us quite a bit. I was the first one to graduate from University of Toronto. And coming to Canada, I always say it's a gift. You make it what it is. And I believe that I was lucky, but we work hard, and supporting one another was very important. I worked for Bell Canada for almost 2 decades and worked for the city for just over 8 years. And again, I'm privileged. And I always see it that way. Even though we work hard, I'm a privileged individual. And who I am, I'm all about making things better. I'm all about, making sure that my title's not what matters. It's how and who I am and and how I treat people is what I care about. Being authentic, being someone that you can count on, taking pride in what you do. How I conduct myself is really important. And I think that should be all of us at the end of the day. I build great teams. I build people that want to actually be part of something. I spend time with my family. And obviously with COVID, it's been very, very tough. And you know, as a family, I've had quite a few deaths in the last year, none COVID, but it's hard when you don't get together. And who I am, I'm about the family, and the family can be at work and the family can be at home. And those are important things. And I am a big supporter of gender, women and men. And I'm here to support them to make sure that I can actually help them move forward if they need my support. And you know, my whole purpose of is to be a positive individual and have a great impact in people's lives that I can support them. That's who I am, and that's who I always have actually, and that's how I live. And hopefully that's how people see me too, based on impact. And I always tell people, it's not about what you do, it's how you make people feel, and that's who Josie Scioli is. So hopefully that answered your question, Ange.
There's a great Maya Angelou quote, which doesn't come to mind right now. Does anybody remember? Something about it's about how you make them feel. So I get that, and you know, it sounds, Josie, that you know, whether it be at work or in professional, you show up, and you show up very authentically, and you have those type of values. So when it comes to Desiree, do you see some similar values in that? And talk to us about you know, what it was like for you as a young woman who had big ambitions, where you grew up, and especially in the work that you chose in the very male-dominated world of engineering.
Thank you, Angie, and nice to be here with everyone. Hope to have a great conversation today. Well, I'm Brazilian, born and raised. I have been living outside of Brazil for about 10 years now, but I do consider myself fully Brazilian. Traveling, living outside, I'm not quite sure if I travel anymore or if I live outside of Brazil, but I go around a lot, and I really take a lot of pleasure in that. And being a young engineer with a lot of ambition, it was hard. You know, it was really hard to really find ways that I could establish myself. I always wanted to do something different than I think everyone around me, my family and friends. When I said, you know, I want to go to the Amazon rainforest and start thinking about the lives of people living there, because that's how I felt at the time I could support people for better livelihoods. Everyone found that really strange. And when I got there and I had to like go into the forest with, you know, a machete in my hand and figure that out on my own with, you know, 15, 20 men watching me fail for many, many times, that really, I think, resonated with me as an experience, because it feels like that a lot even today, right? There's something about being women, there's something about being part of other equity deserving groups. And I do feel that age is one of those that play a major role, right? Especially when you have ambition, when you want to really grow fast in your career and you dedicate yourself to that, right? It's a hard failure if that is not based on merit, if that's not based on your qualifications, but rather on pre-assumptions of other people, right? On what you can deliver or not. Mm-hmm. So it was, at the end of the day, actually, I think it made me want to try a little harder. Right, and every time try a little harder, which is it's part of what I carry values in remembering that similar groups might be facing the same challenge, right? They usually have to try a little harder than their peers if they want to succeed, if they want to have a job, if they want to have a good housing condition, right? If they want to have good healthcare. That's usually what a lot of equity deserving groups, such as women, I think, face every day, right? You have to sometimes be a little more amending, a little more accommodating, or a little louder, or a little more competent at times, right? To be able to find your space. So I think that early on experience of being surrounded by men in engineering roles and a lot of remote work I did, a lot of business roles I held, and I kept insisting, also gave me, I think, a lot of strength to keep going. And then to remind myself every day that, you know, we have Women's Day as a day to remind ourselves of the importance of that group, but it's no illusion that day will make any difference, right? We need to really try it out at every action we take. And that is, it's a hard thing to do, but I try as much as possible to think of that as a very easy task as I compare to the outcomes, right? If we can change a little bit the way we recruit people, right? The way we form our teams. Josie mentioned that you build great teams, and I imagine that you're thinking about this every day, right? How we engage with whoever is next to us, and we remind ourselves of that value. The payoff can be so big that the investment in that becomes really worth it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you know what I found, what you said was interesting is not only have you experienced a gender bias, but also an age bias. Can you explain that to me a little bit?
Sure. So my first job was in a Brazilian startup, and that startup was founded by a few of the biggest businessmen in Brazil. And I was the third employee. Really young. I was just fresh out of college. I was 21 years old, and I had as much ambition as you can think of. I thought of myself as, I have everything here. I'll give everything I have. I changed cities. I lived in a place where it was like 3 hours away from the job just because I couldn't afford an apartment close by, and really gave it all. And I started noticing progressively how my encouragement by others would not reflect my self-identification. Right? I thought that I could contribute so much, but I started experiencing like, oh, actually you cannot do this, or not for now, right? Let's wait a little bit until you're more mature. And I think I carried over a lot of, it really started damaging, I think, my self-esteem at that point. But I had a really good mentor at that job, and that person really turned me around, right? And gave me the opportunity to think differently and say, listen, there's an opportunity for you to grow, take it on, and there's gonna be a lot of your experiences elsewhere. So learn and do your best and keep going. So I think that kept reflecting. I like doing management a lot. So I tend to be in positions where other, perhaps more mature professionals don't want to be, right? Because they're past that point. They want to do something more strategic. And I still like operations. I still like a lot of that job. So I'm usually the youngest in the room when we talk about business development. And still, I face a lot of that, right? When I show up in a meeting, we were talking about how to invest millions of dollars. I'll be the one that people probably wonder, what is she doing here again? And it's due to I'm 33, so I'm not super young anymore. But I think with that ambition in my career, I always wanted to push myself a little harder than the day before. Yeah. So that's a little bit of experience there.
I mean, I get excited whenever I'm in a room and there's people with different perspectives because that diversity of thought is really, whether it be age or stage of your life, is really when the magic happens. So, you spoke about mentorship, and I also like to talk about championship. And in the context of mentorship, in that gender equality and equity, Joanna, you are a woman co-head, executive director, effectively, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the first woman to really focus on the business of Toronto International Film Festival. So in the context of gender equality and equity, do you feel a certain sense of responsibility to include and look out for women across, not just at TIFF, but across the entire film industry? And if so, how do you and how does TIFF put that gender equity and equality lens into practice?
So I feel like any woman in a leadership position has a responsibility of try to elevate other women, elevate women's voices, and support women. So definitely that's something that I bring to everything that I do. When I used to be a producer, was so important, even if I was working with a male filmmaker, to make sure that we were looking and giving opportunities for women to take key positions. And sometimes it's just, you just need to bring, because the talent is there. People sometimes complain that there's no pipeline, but there is a pipeline. You just need to maybe look a little further, and you will find incredible women that are absolutely competent and ready to do the job. So I always made that effort on anything that I did to make sure that we're looking and giving the opportunity for women to do the job. But I believe that we really need to be intentional on how we lead. And then in terms of the question for the industry, there is there's still a big gap in the industry. So if you think about it, like if you look at film school, you actually have 50% of the student body is female. And then by the time that you have people submitting their films or their first films for a festival, that gap just widens. And instead we go from 50-50 to then have 70% of all films submitted to any of the main bigger festivals are directed by men. So then we need to be intentional at trying to correct. So it's hard if you start with a smaller pool to come back to 50%, but we would definitely try to bigger it up. So bring up that percentage. So last year at the festival was the first time that we actually were able to have 46% of the films directed by women in the festival, which was great. But you need to be intentional to do that work. Then you also need to do the work in terms of what stories are we telling, how are characters being represented, are we seeing enough amazing women characters in the films and their stories. So that's another lens, and sometimes there are male directors who are doing that. We have this big campaign called Share Your Journey, and we do a lot of work in terms of trying to really, kind of narrow that gap, support, mentor women in film, try to give them the skill sets and give them the opportunity to network, to get mentorship, so that they can kind of accelerate their career. Because, in average, it takes a man 1.5 years to get their film done, and also between 2 films, and it could take a woman 5 to 7 years. So how can we help women accelerate this process? Why is it so much harder for women to finance films, to get people to believe and to put money? And we know that women filmmakers make great films, and I'm hoping that with the opportunities that are now given to female filmmakers to do big studio films, big kind of IP driven films with superheroes, that will help prove that it makes economic sense to hire women directors. So that's some of the work that we're doing in terms of our own industry.
It does make economic sense in more ways than one and across many different industries. But, I really love the fact that you talk about intentionality, because ultimately what I'm getting is that, to include women, it's intentional. Inclusion is intentional. You have to put the effort into it. So it may be easy to pull from the 70% of men, but you have to be very intentional about pulling from the group of women as well. But I wanted to ask you one question. What happens? Why is there a 50-50 split in film school? And then what happens during that time where, you lose 20% and it becomes 30?
I think it's harder. It's harder to get your film off the ground. It's harder to get financing. And unless you in film school, maybe you do a short film, so you need the opportunity you have to develop your feature film. You have to get a producer on board. You need to get financing. And I think all of these elements are just harder for women. And then some people just give up or look for other opportunities.
Right. It sounds like, they're the same barriers in your industry that there are in many other. I do want to say that, Joanna, you're also you've had 40 feature films, so you've done well in your own right when it comes to that. Now let's talk to Desiree. When it comes to research and innovation, especially the innovation piece, I think might be interesting when it comes to being able to potentially raise capital. But the Future Skills Center is a major research and innovation initiative for Canada's federal government. It focuses on the skills required now and in the future. In such a challenging year, you know, I really, it makes me feel fantastic, and it gives me, you know, positive energy when I see women doing so well, or when I hear good news stories. So, you know, how does that make you feel? And can you share any, you know, synergies with what you do at the Future Skills Center, and you know, how you are helping to support women and all equity-seeking groups?
Absolutely. I think last year, there's still some time for us to understand what happened last year, right? There's a lot of difficulties, but also a lot of good work, I think, that came out of this, just the need, right, to pivot, to be able to have to deal with the situation and that we faced last year. And I take a great inspiration in the work of our project partners at the Future Skills Center, right? Because a lot of the organizations we work with, they were delivering training, right, for workforce. They were delivering opportunities for employment for those that are facing barriers, have been facing barriers for a long time. And a lot of that work happens online, but also in person. So many of these organizations had to pivot to a model that they had never tested before, right? And that's where innovation really happens, I think, right, is when at all levels, I mean, small organizations, large organizations, everywhere in Canada. If you're working with 5 people, work with 500,000, you know, the challenges are really, really important to be acknowledged. And I take an amazing amount of inspiration, because a lot of the organizations has had, you know, maybe 2 weeks to pivot and had to keep going. And our work, I remember being asked a few times, well, how is it to work online? This job I have right now, I was onboarded online, and it's so hard to, you know, get to know everyone. And I said, well, we are here to support those that have to work with other 5,000 people and be able to continue training them in the workforce, because they're about to lose their jobs, right? Because their jobs are about to become obsolete. So we, at the Future Skills Center, we ensure that at least 50% of our investments in projects are for equity-seeking groups, right? Projects that support in training and employment equity-seeking groups. A lot of these are women-led initiatives, and also that support women in the workforce. And I mean, how else can we get better inspiration than those that have just had to pivot and are doing really good work, right? And are facing challenges as an opportunity to do better, to sometimes be more efficient, right? You can think about the opportunities that you can take advantage of online, and also those that don't have access to easy technologies to pivot online so quickly now have the opportunity, I think, with support from Future Skills Center, but with all organizations that support this type of work as well, to go after a lot of the innovation that is needed now, but that can stay right after this, to improve the work, to make it, to, you know, just increase our impact over time.
Innovation, absolutely. Thank you. So Josie, we're celebrating achievements today, and that's what International Women's Day and Week is really all about. You know, when celebrating those achievements, especially for those women who have shattered that invisible glass ceiling, I would be remiss not to point to Kamala Harris. Kamala is the highest ranking female official in U.S. history, the first female, the first African American, the first Asian American vice president, whose mother said, and now she continues to say, I may be the first, but I won't be the last. I don't know about you, but I felt something that day. It made me feel hope. What about you? How did that make you feel? How did those words, how did that moment in history, and what do you take from that? How do you potentially look at that as an inspiration to then support other women so that they too can achieve high levels of success no matter where they work or what they do?
So that's a great question. So I remember the day because I actually I stopped what I was doing. I actually went and looked on CBC when it was going live. I had goosebumps. Like I was actually, and I had tears of joy, and I just thought, wow, what a moment. just take that in. And I thought about, as she was being sworn in, I actually stood up when she actually got sworn in. I stood up for her because I was so excited. And I remember texting a lot of my colleagues, but my daughter, who's 27, who actually lives in Rochester, New York right now. She's doing her doctorate there, and saying, "Are you watching this?" And she said, "Absolutely." And then we saw the poet speak, and what an amazing speech she did too. So for me, it was heartfelt. It was, and what I loved about it is when you look at Kamala, you look at, like, it's a real person, and it was just so, she's so endearing. And so outside of her being, in the political rank, and which I deal with all day, all night, she also was a person, and I was so pleased to actually see that and be part of that, of history. So that's how I felt. So so it was an honor of being there at that time. How do I support women? I do a lot of role, and I support men and women. So I just want to make sure, not just women, but I do spend a lot of time around women. I actually, I was, like I said, I was the first to graduate, and I always support women that need to have that conversation to see how they can actually move forward. But I do a lot of listening. I do a lot of mentoring, but I also do sponsoring. Sponsoring is really important. You can mentor, but you have to sponsor. Sometimes you have to actually spend the time necessary to sponsor someone as they're moving through the actual path that they want to get to. So sponsoring and mentoring are two different things for me. So I do that. I do spend a lot of time checking up on people and seeing where they're going if they need support. I also expect people to do that. I have mentors and coaches myself. And as an executive at the city, I actually I'm actually the champion for the Women's Network for the City of Toronto. And this week alone, we have 5 or 7 events throughout the whole week to basically honor the Women's International Day and the whole week. And it's important because the actual group or the network that I champion is a bunch of very passionate and dedicated women. It actually grew in the last 5 years from 100, let's say, people to about almost 2,000 people now are part of the network.
That's great.
And what we've done also is we have signature events, and Angie would know that, she's part of the city too. And these events are all about International Women's Day, obviously, but it's also about wellness, about financial responsibility, accountability, and how you look at it. It's also about socializing, which is really critical in your network, and making sure who's who and actually having those conversations. It's also about mentoring. We do what we call speed mentoring. So we actually connect people together so they can actually build their own relationships. So that to me is really important. We also, what we do as a group, we connect our network with other networks around in the public and private sector. So we work with the government of Ontario. We also work with bank institutions. We work with other sectors so we can learn from each other and create a bigger network of networks. So that's really important, and that's how we support that. And the other thing we also do is we have a mentorship program. We actually have our steering committee champions, actually, we pair them up with advisory boards, like people like me, so we can support young women. And not just young women want mentors, all ages want mentors, and we support that in pairing people up to actually have a great experience. So, and other things that I do is, like most of us, we speak at events to talk about the possibility and how we can support other opportunities. The other area that's really critical for the City of Toronto and many boards nowadays is making sure that we have diversity in our boards. And there is a target the City of Toronto has. They want obviously 50% diversity, and we're really focused on women and obviously BIPOC and other elements, especially in the last couple of years. We're really pushing that really hard, and we're actually getting to the targets. When we started 2 or 3 years ago, we were not at these targets. So that's what I support, and making sure that in my hiring process, I have a diverse hiring process in the pool to make sure that we have all aspects of, it could be diversity of thought, it could be diversity of age, it could be diversity of just different types of knowledge base. So that's what I do. And supporting women for me is actually supporting men too, because the more they can understand how we're doing this, the more we get greater support across the board. And I think that's a role that I play. Many of us around this particular call today and video today are that we can do, and we can continuously do this, because I think it's something that's critical for all women to continuously have these conversations about the importance of mentoring and growing people to the best that they can be.
That's fantastic. Can you do a little bit of a deep dive into what exactly sponsor is, and an example of a very long-term sponsorship that you may be able to share? Like, what were the outcomes there, whether for yourself or somebody else?
Not a problem. So when you have mentors, right? Mentors could be for a period of time. And mentorship is really about getting advice, creating a path and all that. Sponsorship to me is really about someone being, basically have your back, going through and supporting you through key requirements that you're looking for if you're trying to achieve different success requirements, whatever they might be. So a sponsor like me would be at the table actually supporting an individual that they can actually, they're a great candidate for a specific requirement, that they actually sponsor them at specific tables, whether it's for a board or whether it's for a hiring process. And mentor is really more around, they're helping with the path and all that, but they may not be heavily invested in the same way as a sponsor, where you really need to make the investment. You need to be at the table, you need to put yourself out there for the individual. And that's why I differentiate the sponsor and the mentor. The mentor is not passive, but more passive than the sponsor. The sponsor actually is the one that is actually having the conversation and the actual promoting you to the organization, promoting you to specific areas. A mentor will do that, but a sponsor, you can't have too many sponsors. That you have to be careful on. But you need a couple of them that are going to help you, move you through there. I had a sponsor when I was in Bell Canada. I had a sponsor who I actually was in the finance industry because I'm an economics finance major. Someone who said to me, I actually had personality, which is kind of funny. And then he said, you know what? I think you can actually go into sales and service. And guess what I did? I went to sales and service because I had a sponsor who had my back and who actually believed in it and pushed it and was at the table to make it happen with me. So that's kind of what a sponsor does. Great. Well, thank you. I mean, what it sounds like and what it really is somebody talking about you when you're not there. That will help you progress throughout your professional life. So, but at the end of the day, we need those, both men and women, because gender biases, really exist for women leaders. Yourself too, Josie. I'm sure you've walked into a room here or there, and there's been some biases thrown your way. These biases do lead to gaps in wages, credibility, professional advancement, and so much more. There's a positive connotation for men that are confident and strong and ambitious, but for women, these can actually be perceived as dirty words. So Joanna, for decades we've been seeing headlines like this discussed when it comes to gender bias, especially in the workplace. But we also know that mixed gender leadership boosts companies' profitability. It's factual. In fact, companies with female leaders often perform better on the stock market. So, if numbers don't lie, why is it so hard for women? Why are we still 100 years away from gender equity and gender equality?
As you said, the numbers don't lie. So the proof is there. It makes good economic sense. I don't know. I think it's the culture, and we all have a responsibility to try to change that culture. And we face it every day. It's in small ways, but the bias is there. Like it's an interesting finding. For instance, when executives who evaluate material, screenplays for a film,
yeah.
if on the front page, you have the name of the writer, if it's a female writer, or you have absolutely no name, you just have the title of the project and you don't say the author, the likelihood of that project being considered is much higher if the people evaluating don't know that has been written by a woman. So this is, just a kind of small example in the film industry, but there's just so much education and training that needs to be done. It's hard to change the culture, and we just need to continue to do the work.
Right. Be very...
Angie, can I jump in?
Of course, please.
That was too tempting for me to not jump in, so sorry for interrupting.
Yes.
When you said numbers don't lie, and that coupled with the statement, like women and other equity-seeking groups have a hard time still, right, to find themselves in better places. Often we are willing to bend data to match what our preconceptions already are. So, when we are tempted to make a decision that is hard, usually hard one based on gut feeling, we all have that. I don't quite know how to make this decision, but I have this gut feeling. And I think that's often another word for, I have these preconceptions, I would just go with what I feel comfortable. And accepting equity-seeking groups as part of your team, accepting equity-seeking groups as part of leadership, your leadership, this is very different, right? We as a society are not very used to it. So I think if we have the data and we learn how to train ourselves, right, to move away more often than what we want to, away from this gut feeling, that first reaction, right, that first instinct that we have when we make decisions, I think that will go a long way, right? Just because if you don't see enough female leaders, if you don't see enough leaders from other equity-seeking groups as you grow up, how can you think that that's going to be a great leader for you? How that you can think that that's going to be a great peer in your job or someone you're hiring, right? It's just based on precedent. These groups haven't been represented or starting to more and more. Yeah. But I just want to make that note for the gut feeling, how we use data, but we tend to use data to just confirm what we believe. And there's such a power in data when we do actually more of a critical analysis and try to acknowledge that we do all have biases, right? Women have bias against women, and other groups have bias against their own groups. It's just something that we have wired, we have trained to be, and also we have wired in our system. So I think that first step for me, at least in my career, in my professional and personal life, that has been a huge lesson learned, right? That to stop myself from taking that first reaction and really thinking through the situation I'm leaving, really thinking through as I'm hiring someone, what can I do to reduce my bias as much as possible, for example.
Yeah, I find that interesting, and I appreciate what you said, that women also have biases against women, right? It's universal. It's very equitable across the board when it comes to that. I really appreciate your comment. Thank you. Now I just want to go back to Joanna for a second, because Joanna, you mentioned something very interesting where it comes with somebody's name. So when people's names are not included and you're really only looking at their credentials, is that a tactic that people should use moving forward to potentially accelerate equity and equality?
Yeah, absolutely. There are a lot of organizations in the film industry that are doing a lot of work on how to improve the situation with women in film, and they're doing workshops and spending the time doing the training with studios and decision makers. The other thing, usually people say, well, we don't work with more women because there's no pipeline, or, but obviously they're going to think like, okay, let's put a list of 10 directors, and they're going to think about the 10 directors they just worked with. They're not going to think about like, let's find a good, number of people that come from different backgrounds and bring different perspectives, and let's pull together a really fulsome slate of people, so that someone can then make the decision. So there are so many moments where people need to make decisions where they just kind of default to what's easy, to what's familiar, to what they're used to. So we just need to force to like, let's make in their moment. Let's make sure that women are being considered, that we're eliminating that piece that makes it more difficult. So if it is for people to evaluate material without having the name, if that makes a difference, then that's how material should be evaluated.
Right. And some people are very risk averse, right? They go to what they know will be successful rather than being able to take that risk. So, Josie, what do you think the solution is here, if there is one, if there are many, and more importantly, how do we do this at scale? Let's maybe talk about the City of Toronto, but just generally, how do we fix this? How do we accelerate the change? And how do we do this at scale?
So I find it interesting because if I could fix this, then I would be a millionaire for sure. But I can't. But I think the important part, it's rooted in our societal beliefs, right? So that's one thing, right? So, and if we talk about how long we've had gender gaps, right? It's going to take another 100 years, and it will be past my lifetime. But I think there's things that we can do, and the things that I think that we can do to actually not beat gender stereotypes or actually try to get through them is, I always say, learn. Knowledge is power. Make sure you, like as an individual, as a woman, understand what you're dealing with. When you go to the mechanics, right? The mechanic says, "Oh, you know what? You don't know anything." Understand what you're dealing with, right? So I always say, learn. Knowledge is power. The other one is speak up, raise awareness, making sure people are aware, and making sure that you are there to make sure that people are aware that you know what's going on is really important here, and making people accountable for their actions. The other one is react. And I'm a big believer that if we hear or we see things that are not appropriate, that we believe that need to be discussed, that we should actually react and make sure that we have those conversations. I think that to me is very, very important. The other, one of the things I've always heard, I've heard, and I remember I was in Bell Canada and I was an executive there, and 3% of the population were women when I was there. So, that things have changed there. We're probably at 50% or more now at executive level. So things are shifting. We know that they're shifting. Sometimes I hear things like, men are promoted based on potential. Women are promoted for proven performance. Well, we all have potential just like men do, right? So at the end of the day, so those are interesting discussions what we have. And it's something we need to continuously have the conversation. Scaling is continuously having the conversation and making sure that these are productive discussions as we have. So one of the things I say to overcome stereotypes is be an individual so people view you first, not by who you are, by a gender, but by what, the person you are. Remember, you don't need to take on male interests or stereotypical behavior. You don't have to actually do that. You can be who you are. And that's where we need to all act in that way. And I always believe that get allies, making sure your allies are not just women, they're men too, making sure we have that and trying to have those conversations. And it's funny because someone said to me, successful women are demanding and caring. And I'm thinking, what's wrong with that? Right. So that's okay. I am. So who what's wrong with that? That's not a problem, right? And I always believe truth to power discussions, and we need to make sure that as individuals, scaling it is about continuously having a conversation, making sure that the policies and the approaches and the leadership you have in your organization actually walk the talk. And then when you start seeing that, you will scale that up. You will start seeing. You're still going to have biases. It's just women have biases of each other, as you said. I remember when I was in Bell Canada, and I dressed the way I wanted, and they told me why I wasn't wearing a blue suit. I said, that's not what I dress, so I'm not going to wear that. So there's a bias depending on the individuals, and I think the conversation is extremely important, and that we continue having them as individuals. And to me, that is how we scale, is continuously having the conversation and bringing policies and approaches into the organizations and into our life that become constant and something that's more sustainable.
Thank you. You mentioned a few, yin and yang type of words, and we're going to get to a couple of audience questions. But first, Desiree, when it comes to words matter. They can have a lot of impact. So, like men, when they are assertive or decisive, it's a good thing, or rather, that's how society sees men, as assertive, decisive, strong. But society sees women as, you know, warm, caring, like Josie just mentioned. So it's separate. But when it comes to leadership, that really clashes with what the prototype rather of leadership should be. So how do you specifically choose to challenge gender bias? And like, what are some of the tactics? What do you do? How do you manage it?
And one thing that I've been trying harder and harder to push myself to do is to take some risks myself, right? I think I was, as a young professional, sometimes because I was the youngest in the room, I also got comfortable in being more shy and less willing to take risks, right? Because some of those risks that I took early on, I got immediately shut down. And again, this mentor really helped me understand that this is just something that I had to work with, right? If I wanted to keep that career ambition going. And I started to take more risks and to speak up and say what I wanted to say, often with a rough thought, right? That's sometimes not well received, often with an assertive statement that I wanted to make sure that I got heard. And I think if I were to make any statistics here, I would say that 80% of the times I do still, and I have heard crickets in meetings, right? When I got really assertive and perhaps a little more aggressive or being perceived as aggressive, right? Because I got a little louder than people would expect because I'm a young woman in the business world.
You shock them.
I shock them, exactly. And, you know, I think it comes with taking risks. I encourage my team and others to feel comfortable in the environment that I can create, right, in my team, to be able to practice how to do this and go outside where they might not be so supported, but to continue to take risks. I think that's an important role, as Josie was mentioning, right, of sponsorship, or really being having people's backs and having the spaces where they can practice, because it's such a huge leap sometimes, right, to take that risk in front of your board for the first time. So let's practice in a place where we feel more comfortable. And that is something I've been doing myself and others around me and my team to continue doing. And I've perhaps heard for the first time a woman under 30 to speak up in a meeting where they just haven't seen that before, right?
Yeah.
So I think that part also comes with brings me a lot of peace more and more when I will take the risk and I will accept that others might have seen that for the first time, and be also understanding that that can come as a shock, and that's okay, right? We just need to together take the risks and understand how we receive things and be supportive of each other, because it's all new, right? And addressing the question of how we do this at scale, I think it's a step by step. There's a lot of things we can do today.
Yeah.
But we do need to be very patient, even with that person that we want to just, you know, walk away from because they have pushed us that hard, right? I think that's which we can try. There are limits, of course, but registering that patience that goes both ways. I think it's when things the wheel starts turning over and over again. And hopefully we'll get to one day that we won't even have to discuss this during a panel like this.
God, I hope so. I hope so. I hope so. Okay, what an amazing conversation so far. We have time for a few audience questions. So the first one is about the infamous boys club. You know, how do women break into the boys clubs? And they exist everywhere. Especially, you know, from a professional perspective in male-dominated industries. And perhaps, Joanna, I'll start with you.
I have no interest to break into boys' club. I want,
there you go.
You know, figure out if we can have a more inclusive club or a women's club, if that has to be. But, you know, of course, boys' clubs are there. You know, sometimes it feels like my own industry is itself a boys' club.
Right.
The majority of films that you see, the majority of stories that you see are about men. But you have to fight for a more inclusive world and a more diverse world. And you know, that I think that's one of the things that I'm excited about, the work that we're doing at TIFF with Cameron Bailey, the artistic director, and my co-head, is that we are trying to revisit. What is the history of cinema? It's not just films by white male directors. There are women directors, there are filmmakers of color. Let's bring those voices to light, and I think that's the work that I'm interested in.
Awesome. Yeah, I love you. You're definitely a storyteller, and you exude that, especially in how in what you do with TIFF. Josie, any interest? And have you ever been able to, break into that boys' club? Do you care to? Tell us about it.
So I came from a man's world for sure, where I worked. I actually never cared about that, to tell the truth. But I did learn how to golf, but I actually learned to golf because I liked it. So that was important. I liked to golf. So therefore I wanted to be good at it. And it happened to be most of the people that were golfing were men. And I think things have changed dramatically in the last probably 10 to 15 years. And because the conversations are different, I have a son, his group of friends are diverse to no end. So I think the shift is happening even in the last 2 years about all these cases that we've seen. It's changing. The conversation is changing. So I actually don't care about the boys' club. I do know it's there, but one would say there's a women's club too, and one would say who cares about that too. I think the most important thing is that you're comfortable in your own skin, that you do what you believe is right, you do it in a respectful manner, and therefore you're part of something that you care about. There's going to be clubs no matter how you look at it, but the important part is making sure you're true to yourself. And I will never ever do something that's not true to myself. I like golfing. I actually compete against myself. That's why I look at it. But I know it's there. It's not like it's not there. It's like saying it's not there. It is there. We know it's there. But it's not something that I'm going to spend a lot of time thinking about.
You know what? I love what you just said, because they say, I don't know who said it, but the only person that you should be competing with is yourself, and the version of yourself yesterday. And I completely agree with that. So
I'm not a good golfer still, just so you know. I just look good when I golf. I don't golf well still, just so we're clear.
As long as you look good, Josie, that's fantastic. That's important.
That's all that
right?
matters.
Right. Desiree, another different question. They say that you are the combination of the 5 people that you hang out with the most. Who are you? Who are those 5 people for you?
Oh, that's such a good one. I'd say that my mother is definitely someone I hang out a lot with. She is a businesswoman herself that faced, I think, a lot more difficulties than I do today as a young woman. So I take a lot of her inspiration.
Generational. That's a generational thing too, right?
For sure. And that makes, putting things in relative context usually helps us go through difficult situations. And this is certainly something that I benefit from. The fact that my mom broke a lot of barriers, right, to be where she is. She was the first in the family that went to college. She got an MBA when she had 3 kids, and she kept going. And that's a lot of inspiration for me today. Certainly that's a person. My partner, who is trying to get into an academic job, and that certainly is another industry that we don't often mention as male dominated, but it is very much so, and it's a difficult one to break into. I have a lot of people that I take a lot of inspiration that I wanted to combine in the 3 remaining spots there. The partners that I have worked all my life, and the examples that I got, I think when we really care about what happens, right, with the hours that we put into our work, what happens to someone that is trying to implement a program, that is trying to design a policy, right, is trying to change something to make just the lives of people better. I think, again, there's difficulties, right, the day-to-day, the meeting that didn't go well because you didn't get heard or things like that, just lose so much of the focus because, again, you have a mission, you have a path to take. So I will dedicate the last 3 spots to a collective group of amazing people I've worked with.
Fantastic. Well, you are the sum of all those parts. So, ladies, really quickly, final last words and words of wisdom for those who tuned in today. Josie.
I have so many of them I was thinking about, but I'd say it's okay to need help. You can't pour from an empty cup. Take time for yourself.
Wise words. Senhora Vicente.
I would say, just being comfortable with who you are, being authentic, embracing that at times we're vulnerable, at times we're afraid, and at times we're shy, at times we're confident. We are all of those people, and just being kind to ourselves, and believing that we don't need to become someone else than who we are.
Thank you. And Desiree, real quick, please.
Real quick, don't be afraid of being who you are in any situation. Don't try to change yourself if you don't want to.
Love it.
Don't always trust your gut feeling, and go after primary source of information.
Awesome. Okay, everyone, thank you so much for tuning in. If you want to check out the show again, it will be available on ChooseToChallenge tomorrow. And one last word for me, remember that women make up half of the world's population and the other half are their sons. Thank you for watching.